Hello and welcome to India Reads. My name is Pradeep and we are reading the story of my experiments with truth by M.K. Gandhi. Let's start. The Phoenix Settlement. I talked over the whole thing with Mr. West, described to him the effect unto this last had produced on my mind, and proposed that the Indian opinion should be removed to a farm on which everyone should labor, drawing the same living wage and attending to the press work in spare time. Mr. West approved of the proposal, and £3 was laid down as a monthly allowance per head, irrespective of colour or nationality. But it was a question whether all of the 10 or more workers in the press would agree to go and settle on an out of the way farm and be satisfied with their maintenance. We therefore proposed that those who could not fit with the scheme should continue to draw their salaries and gradually try to reach the ideal of becoming members of the settlement. I talked to the workers in terms of this proposal. It did not appeal to Sergeant Madanjit, who considered my proposal to be foolish and held that it would ruin out and venture on which he had staked his all. That the workers would bolt, Indian opinion would come to a stop, and press would have to be closed down. Among the men working in the press was Chagalal Gandhi, one of my cousins. I put the proposal to him at the same time as to Mr. West. He had a wife and children, but he had from childhood chosen to be trained and to work under me. He had full faith in me, so without argument he agreed to the scheme and has been with me ever since. The machinist Govindaswamy also fell in with the proposal. The rest did not join the scheme but agreed to go wherever I removed the press. I do not think I took more than 2 days to fix up these matters with the men. Thereafter, I at once advertised for a piece of land situated near a railway station in the vicinity of Durban. An offer came in respect of Phoenix. Mr. West and I went to inspect the estate. Within a week, we purchased 20 acres of land. It was a nice little spring and a few orange and mango trees. Adjoining it was a piece of 80 acres which had more fruit trees and a dilapidated cottage. We purchased this too, the total cost being £1,000. The late Mr. Rustamji always supported me in such enterprises. He liked the project. He placed at my disposal second-hand corrugated iron sheets of a big godown and other building material with which we started work. Some Indian carpenters and masons who had worked with me in the Boer wall helped me in erecting a shed for the press. The structure, which was 75 feet long and 50 feet broad, was ready in less than a month. Mr. West and others, at great personal risk, stayed with the carpenters and masons. The place, uninhabited and thickly overgrown with grass, was infested with snakes and obviously dangerous to live in. At first, we all lived under canvas. We carted most of our things to Phoenix in about a week. It was 14 miles from Durban and 2.5 miles from Phoenix Station. Only one issue of the Indian opinion had to be printed outside in the Mercury press. I now endeavored to draw to Phoenix those relations and friends who had come with me to India to try their fortune and who were engaged in business of all kinds. They had come in search of wealth, and it was therefore difficult to persuade them, but some agreed. Of these, I can single out only Maganlal Gandhi's name. Others went back to business. Maganlal Gandhi left his business for good to cast in his lot with me, and by ability, sacrifice, and devotion stands foremost among my original co-workers in my ethical experiments. As a self-taught handicraftsman, his place among them is unique. Thus, the Phoenix settlement was started in 1904, and there, in spite of numerous odds, Indian opinion continues to be published. But the initial difficulties, the changes made, the hopes and the disappointments demand a separate chapter. Next chapter, 20, the first night. It was no easy thing to issue the first number of Indian opinion from Phoenix. Had I not taken two precautions, the first issue would have had to be dropped or delayed. The idea of having an engine to work the press had not appealed to me. I had thought that hand power would be more in keeping with an atmosphere where agricultural work was also to be done by hand. But as the idea had not appeared feasible, we had installed an oil engine. I had, however, suggested to West to have something handy to fall back upon in case the engine failed. We had therefore arranged a wheel which could be worked by hand. The size of the paper, that of a daily, was considered unsuitable for out-of-the-way place like Phoenix. It was reduced to full-scale paper size so that in case of emergencies, copies could be stuck off with the help of a threader. In the initial stages, we all had to keep late hours before the day of publication. Everyone, young and old, had to help in folding the sheets. We usually finished our work between 10 o'clock and midnight, but the first night was unforgettable. We had got out an engineer from Durban to put up the engine and set it going. He and West tried their hardest but in vain. Everyone was anxious. West, in despair, at last came to me with tears in his eyes and said, "The engine will not work. I am afraid we cannot issue the paper in time. If that is the case, we cannot help him. No use shedding tears. Let us do whatever is humanly possible." "What about the hand wheel?" I said, comforting him. "Where have we the men to work it?" he replied. "We are not enough to cope with the job. It requires relays of 4 men each, and with our men, all are tired." Building work had not yet been finished, so the carpenters were still with us. They were sleeping on the press floor. I said, pointing to them, "But can't we make use of these carpenters, and we may have a whole night of work? I think this device is still open to us." "I dare not wake the carpenters, and our men are really too tired," said West. "Well, that's for me to negotiate," said I. "Then it is possible that we may get through the work," West replied. I woke up the carpenters and requested their cooperation. They needed no pressure. They said, "If we cannot be called upon in an emergency, what use are we? You rest yourselves and we will work the wheel." For us it is easy work. Our own men were of course ready. West was greatly delighted and started singing a hymn as we set to work. I partnered the carpenters, all the rest joined turn by turn, and thus we went on until 7 a.m. This was a good deal to do. I therefore suggested to West that the engineer might now be asked to get up and try again to start the engine, so that if we succeeded we might finish in time. West woke him up and he immediately went to the engine room, and lo and behold, the engine worked almost as soon as he touched it. The whole press rang with peals of joy. "How can this be? How is that all our labours last night were of no avail, and this morning it has been set going as though there were nothing wrong with it?" I inquired. "It is difficult to say," said West or the engineer. "I forget which. Machines also sometimes seem to behave as though they require rest like us." For me, the failure of the engine had come as a test to us all, and its working in the nick of time as a fruit of our honest and earnest labours. The copies were dispatched in time, and everyone was happy. This initial insistence ensured the regularity of the paper and created an atmosphere of self-reliance in Phoenix. There came a time we deliberately gave up the use of engine and worked with hand power only. Those were, to my mind, the days of highest moral upliftment for Phoenix. Polak takes the plunge. It has always been my regret that although I started the settlement at Phoenix, I could stay there only for brief periods. My original idea had been gradually to retire from practice, go and live at the settlement, earn my livelihood by manual work there, and find the joy of service in the fulfillment of Phoenix. But it was not to be. I have found by experience that man makes his plans to be often upset by God, but at the same time, where the ultimate goal is the search of truth, no matter how a man's plans are frustrated, the issue is never injurious and often better than anticipated. The unexpected turn that Phoenix took and the unexpected happenings were certainly not injurious, though it is difficult to say that they were better than our original expectations. In order to enable every one of us to make a living by manual labor, we parceled out the land round the press in pieces of 3 acres each. One of these fell to my lot. On all the plots we, much against our wish, built houses on corrugated iron. Our desire had been to have mud huts thatched with straw or small brick houses, such as would become ordinary peasants, but it could not be. They would have been more expensive and would have meant more time, and everyone was eager to settle down as soon as possible. The editor was still Mansukla Nazar. He had not accepted the new scheme and was directing the paper from Durban, where there was a branch office for Indian opinion. Though we had paid compositors, the idea was for every member of the settlement to learn typesetting, the easiest, if the most tedious of the processes in a printing press. Those therefore who did not already know the work learnt it. I remained a dunce to the last. Maganlal Gandhi surpassed us all. Though he had never worked before in a press, he became an expert compositor and not only achieved great speed, but to my agreeable surprise, quickly mastered all the other branches of press work. I have always thought that he was not conscious of his own capacity. We had hardly settled down, the buildings were hardly ready, when I had to leave the newly constructed nest and go to Johannesburg. I was not in a position to allow the work there to remain without attention for any length of time. On return to Johannesburg, I informed Polak of the important changes I had made. His joy knew no bounds when he learned of the loan of his book had been so fruitful. "It is not possible," he asked, "for me to take Is it not possible, he asked, for me to take part in the new venture? Certainly, said I. You may if you like to join the settlement. I'm quite ready, he replied, if you admit me. His determination captured me. He gave me a month's notice to his chief to be relieved of the critic and reached Phoenix in due course. But his sociability, by his sociability, he won the hearts of all and soon became a member of the family. Simplicity was so much a part of his nature, far from feeling the life at Phoenix in any way strange or hard. He took to it like a duck takes to water. But I could not keep him there for long. Mr. Rich had decided to finish his legal studies in England, and it was impossible for me to bear the burden of the office single-handedly, so I suggested to Polak that he should join the office and qualify as an attorney. I had thought that ultimately both of us would retire and settle at Phoenix, but that never came to pass. Polak's was such a trustful nature that when he reposed his confidence in a friend, he would try and agree with him instead of arguing with him. He wrote to me from Phoenix that though he loved the life there and was perfectly happy and had hopes of developing the settlement, still he was ready to leave and join the office to qualify as an attorney. If I thought that thereby we should quickly realize our ideals, I heartily welcomed the letter. Polak left Phoenix, came to Johannesburg and signed his articles with me. About the same time, a Scotch theosophist whom I had been coaching for a local legal examination also joined as the article clerk on my inviting him to follow Polak's example. His name was McIntyre. Thus, with the laudable object of quickly realizing the ideals at Phoenix, I seemed to be going deeper and deeper into a contrary current. And had God not willed otherwise, I would have found myself entrapped in this net spread in the name of a simple life. In what will be a few more chapters that I shall describe how I and my ideals were saved in a way no one had imagined or expected. Whom God protects. I had now given up all hope of returning to India in the near future. I had promised my wife that I would return home within a year. The year was gone without any prospect of my return, so I decided to send for her and the children. On the boat bringing them to South Africa, Ramdas, my third son, broke his arm while playing with the ship's captain. The captain looked after him well and had him attended to by the ship's doctor. Ramdas landed with his hand in a sling. The doctor had advised that as soon as we reach home, the wound should be dressed by a qualified doctor. But this was a time when I was full of faith in my experiments in earth treatment. I had even succeeded in persuading some of my clients who had the faith in my quackery to try the earth and water treatment. Then what was I to do for Ramdas? He was just 8 years old. I asked him if he would mind my dressing his wound. With a smile, he said he did not mind at all, for it was not possible for him at that age to decide what was the best thing for him. He knew very well the distinction between quackery and medical treatment, and he knew my habit of home treatment and had faith enough to trust himself to me. In fear and trembling, I undid the bandage, washed the wound, applied a clear earth poultice, and tied the arm up again. This sort of dressing went on daily for about a month until the wound was completely healed. There was no hitch, and the wound took no more time to heal than the ship's doctor said it would under the usual treatment. This and other experiments enhanced my faith in such household remedies, and I now proceeded with them with more self-confidence. I widened the sphere of their application, trying the earth and water and fasting treatment in cases of wounds, fevers, dyspepsia, jaundice, and other complaints, with success on most occasions. But nowadays I have not the confidence that I had in South Africa, and experience has even showed that these experiments involve obvious risks. The reference here, therefore, to these experiments is not meant to demonstrate their success. I cannot claim complete success for any experiment. Even the medical men make no such claim for their experiments. My object is to only show that he who would go in for novel experiments must always begin with himself. This leads to a quicker discovery of truth, and God always protects the honest experimenter. The risks involved in experiments in cultivating intimate contacts with Europeans were as grave as those in nature cure experiments. Only those risks were of a different kind. But in cultivating those contacts, I never so much thought of the risk. I invited Polak to come and stay with me, and we began to live like blood brothers. The lady who was to be Mrs. Polak and he had been engaged for some years, but the marriage had been postponed for a propitious time. I have an impression that Polak wanted to put some money by before he settled down to a married life. He knew Ruskin much better than I, but his Western surroundings were a bar against his translating Ruskin's teachings immediately into practice. But I pleaded with him When there is a heart union, as in your case, it is hardly right to postpone marriage merely for financial considerations. If poverty is a bar, poor man can never marry, and then you are now staying with me, there's no question of household expenses. I think you should get married as soon as possible. As I've said in the previous chapter, I never had to argue a thing twice with Polak. He appreciated the force of my argument and immediately opened correspondence on the subject with Mrs. Polak, who was then in England. She gladly accepted the proposal and in a few months reached Johannesburg. Any expense over the wedding was out of the question. Not even a special dress was thought necessary. They needed no religious rites to seal the bond. Mrs. Polak was a Christian by birth and Polak a Jew. Their common religion was a religion of ethics. I may mention in passing an amusing incident in connection with this wedding. The registrar of European marriages in the Transvaal could not register between black or colored people. In the wedding in question, I acted as the best man. Not that we could have got an European friend for the purpose, but Polak could not brook the suggestion. So we three went to the registrar of marriages. How could he be sure that the parties to a marriage in which I acted as the best man could be whites? He proposed to postpone registration pending inquiries. The next day was a Sunday, the following was a New Year's Day, a public holiday. To postpone the date of a solemnly arranged wedding on such flimsy pretext was more than one could put up with. I knew the chief magistrate who was the head of the registration department, so I appeared before him with the couple. He laughed and gave me a note to the registrar, and the marriage was duly registered. Up to now, the Europeans living with us had been more or less known to me before. But now an English lady who was an utter stranger to us entered the family. I do not remember our ever having had a difference with the newly married couple. But even if Mrs. Polak and my wife had some unpleasant experiences, they would not have been more than what happens in the best regulated homogeneous families. And let it be remembered that mine would be considered an essentially heterogeneous family where people of all kinds of temperaments were freely admitted. When we come to think of it, the distinction between heterogeneous and homogeneous is discovered to be merely imaginary. We are all one family. I had better celebrate West's wedding also in this chapter. At this stage of my life, my ideas about brahmacharya had not fully matured, so I was interested in myself in getting my bachelor's friends married. When in due course West made a pilgrimage to Louth to see his parents, I advised him to return married if possible. Phoenix was the common home, and as we were all supposed to have become farmers, we were not afraid of marriage and its usual consequences. West returned with Mrs. West, a beautiful young lady from Leicester. She came of a family of shoemakers working in a Leicester factory. I have called her beautiful because it was her moral beauty that at once attracted me. True beauty, after all, consists in purity of heart, and with Mr. West had come his mother-in-law too. The old lady is still alive. She put us all to shame by her industry and a buoyant, cheerful nature. In the same way as I persuaded these European friends to marry, I encouraged the Indian friends to send for their families from home. Phoenix thus developed into a little village, half a dozen families having come and settled and begun to increase there. A peep into the household. It has already been said that though household experiences were heavy, the tendency towards simplicity began in Durban. But Johannesburg House came in for much severe overhauling in the light of Ruskin's teaching. I introduced as much simplicity as was possible in a barrister's house. It was impossible to do without a certain amount of furniture. The change was more internal than external. The liking of doing personally all physical labor increased. I therefore began to bring my children also into that discipline. Instead of buying a baker's bread, we began to prepare unleavened wholemeal bread at home according to Kunhe's recipe. Common mill flour was no good for this, and the use of hand ground flour, it was thought, would ensure more simplicity, health and economy. So I purchased a hand mill for £7. The iron wheel was too heavy to be tackled by one man, but easy for two. Polak and I and the children usually worked it. My wife was also occasionally lent a hand though the grinding hour was her usual time for commencing kitchen work. Mrs. Polak also now joined us. On her arrival, the grinding proved a very beneficial exercise for the children. Neither this nor any other work was ever imposed on them, but it was a pastime to them to come and lend a hand, and they were at liberty to break off whenever tired. But the children, including those whom I shall have the occasion to introduce later, as a rule never failed me. Not that I had no laggards at all, but most did their work cheerfully enough. I can recall a few youngsters in those days fighting shy of work or pleading fatigue. We had engaged a servant to look after the house. He lived with us as a member of the family, and the children used to help him in his work. The municipal sweeper removed the night soil, and we personally attended to the cleaning of the closet instead of asking or expecting the servant to do this. This proved a good training for the children. The result was that none of my sons developed an aversion to scavenger's work and naturally they got a good grounding in general sanitation. There was hardly any illness in the home at Johannesburg, but whenever there was any, the nursing was willingly done by the children. I will not say that I was indifferent to their literary education, but I certainly did not hesitate to sacrifice it. My sons have therefore some reason for grievance against me. Indeed, they have occasionally given expression to it, and I must plead guilty to a certain extent. The desire to give them a literary education was there, but I even endeavored to give it to them myself. But every now and then there was some hitch or other. As I had made no other arrangement for their private tuition, I used to get them to walk with me daily to the office and back, a distance of about 5 miles in all. This gave them and me a fair amount of exercise. I tried to instruct them by conversation during these walks. If there was no one else claiming my attention, all my children except the eldest Harilal, who stayed away in India, were brought up in Johannesburg in this manner. Had I been able to devote at least an hour to their literary education with strict regularity, I should have given them, in my opinion, an ideal education. It had been there also my regret that I failed to ensure them enough literary training. The eldest has often given his vent to distress privately before me and publicly in the press. The other sons have generously forgiven the failure as unavoidable. I am not heartbroken over it, and the regret, if any, is that I did not prove an ideal father. But I hold that I sacrificed their literary training to what I genuinely thought may be wrongly believed to be a service to the community. I am quite clear that I have not been negligent in doing whatever was needed for building up their character. I believe it is the bounden duty of every parent to provide for this properly. Whenever, in spite of my endeavor, my sons have been found wanting, it is my certain conviction that they have reflected not want of care on my part, but the defects of both parents. Children inherit the qualities of their parents. No less than their physical and features, environment does play an important role. But the original capital on which a child starts in life is inherited from its ancestors. I have also seen the children successfully surmounting the effects of an evil inheritance. That is due to purity being an inherent attribute of the soul. Polak and I had often heated discussions about the desirability or otherwise of giving children an English education. It has always been my conviction that Indian parents who train their children to think and talk in English from their infancy betray their children and their country. They deprive them of spiritual and social heritage of the nation and render them to that extent unfit for the service of the country. Having these convictions, I made a point of always talking to my children. Gujarati Polak never liked it. He thought I was spoiling their future. He contended with all the vigor and love at his command that if children were to learn a universal language like English from their infancy, they would easily gain considerable advantage over others in the race of life. He failed to convince me. I do not now remember whether I convinced him of the correctness of my attitude or whether as he gave me up as too obstinate. This happened about 20 years ago, and my convictions have only deepened with experience. Though my sons have suffered for want of literary education, the knowledge of the mother tongue that they naturally acquired has been all to their and the country's good, as they do not appear the foreigners they would have otherwise appeared. They naturally become bilingual, speaking and writing English with fairies because of their daily contact with a large circle of English friends and because of their stay in a country where English was the chief language spoken. The Zulu rebellion. Even after I thought I had settled down in Johannesburg, there was to be no settled life for me. Just as I felt that I should be breathing in peace, an unexpected event happened. The papers brought the news of the outbreak of the Zulu rebellion in Natal. I bore no grudge against the Zulus. They had harmed no Indian. I had my doubts about the rebellion itself, but I then believed that the British Empire existed for the welfare of the world. A genuine sense of loyalty prevented me from wishing ill to the empire. The rightness or the otherwise of the rebellion was therefore not likely to affect my decision. Natal had a volunteer defense force, and it was open to it to recruit movement. I read that this force had already been mobilized to quell the rebellion. I volunteered myself, a citizen of Natal, being intimately connected with it. So I wrote to the governor expressing my readiness, if necessary, to form an Indian ambulance corps. He replied immediately, accepting the offer. I had not expected such prompt acceptance. Fortunately, I had made all the necessary arrangements even before writing the letter. If my offer was accepted, I had decided to break up the Johannesburg home. Polak was to have a smaller house, and my wife was to go and settle at Phoenix. I had her full consent to the decision. I do not remember her ever having stood in my way in matters like these. As soon, therefore, as I got the reply from the governor, I gave the landlord the usual month's notice of vacating the house, sent some of the things to Phoenix, and left some with Pola. I went to Durban and appealed for mine. A big contingent was not necessary. We were a party of 24, of whom, besides me, 4 were Gujaratis, the rest were ex-indentured men from South India, excepting one who was a free Pathan. In order to give me the status and to facilitate work, also in accordance with the existing convention, the chief medical officer appointed me to the temporary rank of sergeant major, and the 3 men selected by me to the rank of sergeants and one to that of corporal. We also received our uniforms from the government. Our corps was on active service for nearly 6 weeks. On reaching the scene of the rebellion, I saw that there was nothing there to justify the name of the rebellion. There was no resistance that one could see. The reason why the disturbance had been magnified into a rebellion was that a Zulu chief had advised non-payment of a new tax imposed on his people, and had assuaged a sergeant, a sergeant who had gone to collect the taxes. At any rate, my heart was with the Zulus, and I was delighted on reaching headquarters to hear that our main work was to be the nursing of the wounded Zulus. The medical officer in the charge welcomed us. He said the white people were not willing nurses for the wounded Zulus and their wounds were festering, and that he was at his wits' end. He hailed our arrival as a godsend for those innocent people, and he equipped us with bandages, disinfectants, etc., and took us to the impoverished hospital. The Zulus were delighted to see us. The white soldiers used to peep through the railings that separated us from them and tried to dissuade us from attending to the wounds. And as we would not need them, they became enraged and poured unspeakable abuse on the Zulus. Gradually, I came into closer touch with these soldiers, and they ceased to interfere. Among the commanding officers were Colonel Sparks and Colonel Weil, who had bitterly opposed me in 1896. They were surprised at my attitude and specially called and thanked me. They introduced me to General Mackenzie. Let not the reader think that these were professional soldiers. Colonel Wiley was a well-known Durban lawyer. Colonel Sparks was a well-known as a owner of the butcher shop in Durban. General Mackenzie was a noted Natal farmer. These gentlemen volunteers, and as such had received military training and experience. The wounded in our charge were not wounded in battle. A section of them had been taken prisoners for suspects. The general had sentenced them to be flogged. The flogging had caused severe sores. These being unattended to were festering. The others were Zulu friendlies. Although they had bandages given to them to distinguish them from the enemy, they had been shot by the soldiers by mistake. Besides this work, I had to compound and dispense prescription for the white soldiers. It was easy enough for me, as I had received a year's training at Dr. Booth's Little Hospital. This work brought me in close contact with many Europeans. We were attached to a swift moving column. It had orders to march wherever danger was reported. It was for the most part mounted infantry. As soon as our camp was moved, we had to follow on foot with our stretchers on our shoulders. Twice or thrice we had to march 40 miles a day, but whenever we went, I am thankful that we had God's work to do, having to carry to camp on our stretchers those Zulu friendliest who had been inadvertently wounded, and was to attend upon them as nurses. Okay, with this I will take a break. This has been again a chapter with a few incidents, but nothing that is strongly a part of the book, yes, especially except for the first part, which is his settlement at Phoenix. His settlement of Phoenix is he Gandhi is influenced strongly by a book that he reads of Ruskin, which I think is unto his last, and he feels that he should uh, create a kind of a settlement where he and all the people who were working in the Indian opinion should go and settle there, live together, work as labor. All of them should earn the same salary and put in the same amount of labor. Now, obviously, the people who were settled in the Indian opinions, people like Sergeant Madanjit, who had put in their personal and financial stake in the Indian opinion, were not interested in making such large sacrifices. There were only a few who moved in along with Gandhi to the farm at Phoenix. So now the farm at Phoenix was about 18 miles away from Durban. It was in fact about 3 or 4 miles away from the Phoenix station itself, which was a jungle area, and Gandhi had obviously taken a large risk in procuring this farm for a princely sum of about £1,000. Uh, he also had to contend with, this is like a jungle area, so they had to build everything from ground up. This was an area filled with snakes, and they had to be very careful. A lot of his friends came out and supported him. Many advised him not to go, but some came out and gave him the material that he would require. Some came and gave him the funds that he would require. uh, uh, he The plan was to set up the entire press there and start printing the Indian opinion from there. And then they started, as they started settling down, they started improvising step by step. They moved the machines there. They decided that they would not even lose one issue, and so the issue that came first was a huge struggle. They all worked all night. The machine had conked off. Gandhi decided that he would try and work his best. He was at his wit's end to figure out how to make it work. Of course, he had some carpenters who had come for making of the settlement, and he used them all night. He also helped them physically, and they managed to develop reach a certain point. And in the morning, the press, which had an issue, started working again. Gandhi saw this struggle and this result at the end of it very philosophically. He saw the struggle as a test to see whether he would be able to mobilize and get people to get motivate and work. And and after all the hard work, the fact that the machine started again and they did not, all this hard work was of no avail. He saw this as a result or as a fruit of the honesty and the earnestness that they had put. So Gandhi kind of philosophized through his experiences about doing the right thing. Anyways, so they were able to publish that edition also. They published in a full scale paper instead of the regular size, but nevertheless, like I said, they kept improvising and they made sure that they did not lose out on any edition. Gandhi also was strongly focused on building the community. He encouraged his European friends to come and settle down. One of them was Mr. West, who was deeply involved with the Indian opinion. Mr. West refused to come over initially. And then there was Mr. Polak, who was highly devoted to Gandhi and would do anything that Gandhi would say without an argument. Gandhi would not need to convince him the second time. He would do everything that Gandhi would say. So Gandhi kind of invited him, all of them settled down. He also got his European friends to get married. So whenever they would go back home, he would urge them to propose and get married to their girlfriends. Mr. Pollock is an interesting case of a Catholic marrying a Jew, or was he a Jew marrying a Catholic, something like that, and Gandhi, who was a Hindu, was being a best man. So their wedding obviously had to be registered in Phoenix, and nobody would register that because here was an Indian, a coolie by their definition, who was trying to be the best man for a white man's wedding. So Gandhi had his contacts with the magistrate there, and so he got things done. Right. He also convinced Mr. West to get married when he went back to England. So the Mr. West came back with Mrs. West. Now all these people were staying in the same place. Obviously there would have been differences, but Gandhi feels that they surpass their differences, and um, Gandhi sees that as everybody as his family, and he feels that despite the differences, he was able to get them to live with him uh, peacefully. Gandhi also called upon his Indian contacts, his friends who had businesses in South Africa, to come and settle down in Phoenix, build their businesses there. Quite a few of them did follow Gandhi, but many returned back, and only a few remained. One of the very loyal people that he had within his team was Magan Lal Gandhi, who was also his cousin. Magan Lal dropped his business and became a devoted follower of Gandhi. Uh, Magan Lal also learned the ways of the press and became very skillful in printing compared to all the others. Uh, what else is did we read today? Uh, Yes, he talks a lot about. So what happened once got into Phoenix is that he realized that he's going to be staying longer. So he got his family, his wife and kids to come there. His youngest son, on the journey from India to South Africa, hurt his arm and basically had a fractured arm when he landed in South Africa. Gandhi decided that he would not take him to a physician and get the uh, regular medical treatment, but would try on his earth and water treatment, the natural treatment that he had learned through years of reading and practice, on his own son. So he asked his son for permission. His son Ramdas gave him permission. He is a boy of 8, but he trusted his father. So Gandhi used to bandage, add a bandage every day with earth and little water, and he used to keep replacing it every day. And within a period of 30 days, like the doctor had said, the boy's arm healed. Gandhi obviously had these successes, gave him confidence, but over a period of time, he realized that his treatments obviously had a lot of unknown risks, and like any doctor would say, he does not guarantee anything, and he feels that while he had successes, he did not have a very strong science to back it, and he sees his experiments as just that, experiments. Uh, um, what else? Yeah. So Gandhi eventually, the idea that Gandhi had when he set up the Phoenix farm was to spend as much time as possible there, and maybe in later in life retire there. The idea of going back to India had completely been taken off his mind now that he had his family also back with him in South Africa. He and Mr. West had decided possibly, or Mr. Polak had decided possibly, that they would live their retired life there, but Mr. Polak was required somewhere else. Mr. Polak was a very qualified man, so Gandhi got him to do his finish his course in law and took him as a associate in his firm. Gandhi also needed to earn money to support all his ventures, especially Indian Opinion, which was not very profitable. So Gandhi kind of then moved back to Johannesburg. At Johannesburg, he tried to keep his expenses as limited as possible, and he had settled down. So basically, he did not spend as much time as he would have liked to in Phoenix, and he and his family settled down in Johannesburg when the Zulu War started. Now, this is the Zulu people have had a rebellion, and this was a tax issue. They were taxed, and the Zulus did not want to pay the tax. Now, while Gandhi's sympathies were with the Zulus, he also felt that he should support the British Empire, which was their uh, which was their lord and master, or rather, which was the government of the day for them, both in South Africa and India. And he genuinely felt that he should support the empire, and he did that. He offered his services. He offered the services of the Indian Ambulance Corps, and it was readily accepted. And the relationships that he made with multiple Europeans then sustained him. There are many who had opposed him in 1906, and he obviously won those people over, and the different colonels and the majors in that army were all actually volunteers. One was the owner of a butchery shop, the other was a farmer, and so on and so forth. So everybody knew Gandhi, and Gandhi knew everybody. Most Europeans in South Africa, the popular ones, were known to Gandhi. So only when somebody would come from outside, like Mrs. Polak or Mrs. West, he would have new acquaintances. Otherwise, the Europeans were quite well known to them, and he was able to build a lot of relations with people who necessarily did not agree with him, or he did not agree with people who were not treating Indians well, and he had issues with them on a very basic level. But as a human being, and as somebody who believed in ahimsa and non-violence, and as somebody who believed in building connections by helping through service, he was able to build these relationships. So this is one thing that we could possibly take out from the chapter, and the reading of in today's reading, right? So again, while there was not much happening, like I said, the Phoenix chapter is a very important chapter. It's also shown very well in the movie, and the Phoenix farm also has some references to Ruskin's book. Gandhi also wanted Ruskin's books to be translated in Gujarati, but he could not do it at that point of time. On the subject of language, Gandhi also always used to talk to his children in Gujarati. He wanted them to learn Gujarati. He feels that his children um, might have had grievances which they have expressed to him once, many occasionally rather, and he feels that their grievances are correct. He did not spend as much time as he would have liked to do educating them. Neither did he put them in a formal education system, but he feels that he has given them the right education of life. All his sons, except for his first son, had spent most of their time in South Africa, and therefore were quite devoted to him. His first son alone had spent a lot of time in India, and he has privately to Gandhi and publicly to the press expressed his grievance about the fact that Gandhi did not educate him as much as a regular father would. Now Gandhi admits to this, and makes no bones about it. Uh, he would have liked to spend a lot more time. He would have liked to spend at least an hour educating them. He used to take them for long walks, which was walks about 5 miles, so that he could talk to them, he could guide them on multiple things. But even there, he used to be preoccupied with other things. So essentially, as a father, his heart was in the right place, but he never had the wherewithal or the resources to personally do everything that he wanted to do. So this is my reading of his relationship with his children. With this, I've come to the end of today's recording. Thank you very much for your support. I look forward to seeing your comments. Any suggestions that you have, do drop in the comment section. I shall see you now in the next recording. Take care. Good night.